Good morning and welcome to NNPA's and Black Press USA's Tune In live stream today. Today we're talking about a fantastic and very important topic, mental health awareness during Mental Health Awareness Month, which is the month of May. We're talking about Black mental health in particular. Today with us we have Dr. Jimmy Davis and Dr. Kanika Bell, both professors of psychology at Clark Atlanta University. Thank you for joining me.
Hello.
Oh, you're
Hi.
welcome.
Hi. And I am Nsenga Burton. As you know, hopefully by now, I am Nsenga Burton and I will be hosting the show and talking to them about these very important topic as it relates to COVID. Some of the things that people are dealing with since we've had the shutdown and now the reopening and then the shutdown, as well as the civil unrest that is happening around, or what I would call uprisings that are happening around the country. And what that means when we're taking in these images, particularly of unarmed Black people being killed for no reason, which is not new, just continuing. But we're seeing a lot more of it in terms of our access to it because we are home and able to watch and take in more media than normal. So let's get started. Let's just talk about in general, Black people and mental health awareness. What are the good things that are going on around that area, and where do we need some help? And anyone can start.
Well, I'll jump in. I think for the first time, I think I'm a little bit excited, to be honest with you, because I do believe in the African American community. We are starting to embrace the notion of mental health being part of our comprehensive health. I do think we've come from cultural traditions of, take that to the altar, not to a psychologist. I think we've come from cultural traditions of not sharing our business with other people. So we don't want to talk to a therapist, or we come from traditions of not trusting people who are part of the establishment or the medical profession. And I think we are starting to see a little bit of a change, a little bit of a priority being placed among Black people on how they function mentally and psychologically, rather than physically and spiritually.
All right, Jimmy, Dr. Davis. Can I call you Jimmy?
Absolutely. Please call me Jimmy. Dr. Davis, I feel like I'm in class. No, I think that Dr. Bell is right. I think that we are seeing the African American community start to embrace mental health. Also, we're seeing people that we look up to and role models talk about it more. And I think you think of things like Jada Pinkett and the Red Table Talk. You think of Will Smith and he talked about his mental health. You think about athletes also talking about needing and going to therapy. And it's freeing us up to sort of to the idea that you don't have to keep these conversations to yourself. And then COVID, I know we're going to get there, but COVID has probably exacerbated that because of the isolation. And you're starting to really think about what's going on mentally and how our minds are constructed and what we're dealing with. So I think the African Americans are realizing that talking about these issues is the first step, and there's a lot more that we can do, but we're there now. And I think that's going to help us get further beyond. When you think about Facebook and Twitter and the like, where people are espousing their thoughts, that's mental health as well. That's people, venting, getting their feelings out. And getting people to chime in and give them help and give them support. Now, of course, I think they need to go to professionals, but there's a step to that I think we're finally taking that I think is important.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely seeing a lot more people talk about it online, in the social media space. I mean, even Charlamagne the God has been a very big person who has spoken about his battles with depression and things of that nature. And so, he's in the news for other things now, but he has played a major role in making talking about depression and other forms of mental health, mental illness accessible to many, many people. So building on that, and this is all good news, right? That we are thinking about ourselves more holistically, that we're moving away from just thinking about our physical aspects and moving towards thinking about also exercising our minds, so to speak, and making sure that we are mentally fit. Can you please discuss, Oh yeah, we got Archbishop watching. Hey, hi. Oh, Michael Watson. Hi, welcome. Friend of the show for sure. But can we really discuss the ways in which this particular time, right? This COVID time, where we're shut in, for lack of a better, I like to say I've been held hostage, but we're shut in and in our homes and with our family members that we may sometimes get breaks from and we may not. I'm sure you know about the increasing incidences of domestic violence, child abuse, things of that nature. People not really handling having to be home and being around people and trying to manage and juggle so many different things. Can you talk about what that looks like and what some of the things that are that you know and that you're learning about this particular time and moment in time?
You know, I think for African American people, we were already in some ways cut off from resources. So the difficult part about being quarantined, kidnapped, sequestered, whatever the words that we're using to talk about kind of being sheltered in place at home. There was certainly some concern as a practicing psychologist, you know, a professor, but I also have a practice and I see clients, and I did worry about that. I wondered about access to their medication. I wondered about what would happen when parents and children who already had a bit of a volatile relationship were, for lack of a better term, trapped together. And so I do think because we are such a communal people, that it has hit us especially hard. You know, we enjoy celebrating together. Not that the rest of the world doesn't, but that's such a huge part of who we are as African people in the diaspora. We, you know, whether we're celebrating, whether we are mourning, we do so in community. And so we were suddenly told that we were not allowed to be in community for our own safety. And there, I do think it took a toll on our kind of our mental health. But I think too, so then several of us went into this kind of intense, how do I make this the most healthy for me? And probably had some unrealistic, we talked about this before, some unrealistic expectations for their productivity. And so instead of just caring about mental health and saying, I'm facing a crisis along with every other human on the planet, I'm going to, you know, knock out writing several articles. I'm going to, you know, landscape my yard. I'm going to lose 30 pounds. I'm going to start a new diet. I'll be vegan. I mean, it's just all of these ideas about all these things I'm going to do because I'm at home. And what we probably should have done is first thought about, how will I care for my mental health in this space? How, you know, we first should have identified what am I even feeling? Am I irritated? Am I afraid? I mean, you know, so that we can address those things head on so that they don't kind of spill out in unhealthy and maladaptive ways. And, you know, unfortunately, probably some of us have experienced that.
I think you're dead on, but I think it's also the issue that communally African Americans have been always on the go, right? We have something else that we need to do. So the idea of thinking about our mental health is we don't have time for that, right?
Yeah.
Right. We don't have time for that. And then COVID gave you time, for lack of a better word, right? And it gave us time. And so we've been shifting our modality so much that we don't used to that. And now you're being sat down for a minute and having to think about the things that you probably have been pushing those conversations off for such a long time. To your point, Dr. Bell, right? The contentious relationship with the family member that you lived with was always easy when you had to go to work. You didn't have to think about that. You had other things that you can do, and you can coexist for those few hours to go to sleep. And then you just sort of keep it going. But now that you have to be inside, as much as, you know, we live in Atlanta, so as much as you can be inside, Atlanta's kind of crazy. You know, now that you have to deal with those things, right? And even on the corporate side, you got to think about, do I have a job? Is my job going to exist? And then what is that going to do? That's going to be the second trauma I have to deal with as part of the process, right? The first one is, I got just stuff in my house I got to deal with. You're right. The Home Depots and the like are making a lot more money during COVID because people are doing house projects. But that's also busy work. That's to get you away from thinking about your own mental health and the things you need to do. That's also to get you out of having to deal with your own issue, right? To sit down and really think about, like, where am I in life? What am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? Am I pursuing the goals? Am I happy? Right.
Right.
About that. And I think that this time is giving us, we're in week 11 or 12, and for some people this is week 20 if you talk to them the right way, about this concept. And so it's really forcing us to sit down and think about, who am I? All right. And then what are the things that I value? Did I value only the monikers that I've been taught to be important, which was having a job, going to work, producing money, X, Y, and Z, being a part of these social clubs that gave me identity in different places? Or am I just okay with being Jimmy? And what does that mean for me? And so this time is really important for us to, and I love the fact we're having this conversation, to take a step back and sort of say, how are you doing?
Yes.
What's going on? And go from there. It's a simple question.
Yeah, and so when you talk about these things about being home, there are lots of funny memes that are going around, and some frightening about people who have to be at home with their kids, and they're trying to teach, and they do have a job, like they haven't been laid off or furloughed or what have you, and so they are still having to teach their children. They are still having to cook. Now they got to cook 3 meals on top of it. Karen Williams Butler says, we're on the same page with the current events issue right now. Mental health prevention needs a remedy in times like these. We need a plan for our protection and safety. Yeah, we're getting there, Karen, for sure. And so you have these people who are having to deal with having kids at home. Now you're the chef, you are the nurse, you're the teacher. You're trying to connect and coordinate with teachers who also have children and lives, and they're at home. Can you speak a little bit about that, like the ways in which that manifests and some of the challenges that arise from it?
Oh, I'll start there. I think it's I think we will have so much more respect for teachers when this is over, that we will every time we
stay at home parents.
Yeah.
And homeschool children. Bless you. Absolutely.
Stay at home parents, single parents, who are running, careers and the like. I think the thing that we have to I understand is that we exist in a world where we have multiple identities, right? So what you're just saying, right? You're a parent, you work at any job, whatever the job that may be, but you also have all these other roles that you're responsible for. And what we do most days when we were social is you take one hat off, you put the other one on, right? You go to work, you have your work hat on, you come home, your mom, you're a wife, you're a husband, you're all these different things. And to have all hats on at one time is a burden to bear, right? And so we have to, we're learning what does that really feel like, and which hats are the most important too, right? The parents who are working, who are homeschooling their children, are realizing what their kids actually do in school and are actually learning, right? And that has a burden too, because before it wasn't your problem. It was go to school, they will take care of that. And then when you come home, as long as you did what you were supposed to do, you're fine. Now you're like, that math's not right. That reading needs to be on a different level. And we probably have had some different discussions about how much we respect what our teachers were telling us about our kids that we dismissed because we didn't see it as much as we needed to. It's the same work world, right? You are going to this job and spending all this time. And some people are seeing a lot of efficiencies, I will say that, realizing that they spent a lot of time in meetings they didn't need to be in. But also, we're seeing that our work took up so much of our time that it took away from the things that we have real value for, right? We're seeing, like, I'm also doing executive coaching. We're seeing people in relationships having to figure out what their husbands and their spouses, what were we doing? Because we were probably just coexisting in a lot of places and just one thing to the next, rather than how do we now figure out this community of what we're going to do together,
right?
Who's doing what and where? How does true partnership show up now versus someone else kind of took care of those things for us? And so I think we're talking about so many identities now that we're realizing that we exist in a place where we have to balance these all, and some of them probably need to go away.
Dr. Bell?
Of course, that question speaks to me as a person who is, at home trying to kind of teach kindergarten. I'm a college teacher. I don't know about teaching kindergarten and had to learn suddenly. Still seeing clients. I think what the truth is that many of us never stopped working. So I think there was kind of a general belief sometimes that, like, people are at home and they're no longer working. My day actually longer. I actually have less time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really freed by an article just a woman wrote, and you could tell it was just kind of like her free thought thinking, like, there are people who are keep putting pressure on her to do certain things. And she's like, actually, I feel like I'm working more. I think some places, some of my clients have been telling me, I don't work in corporate America, Jimmy certainly does, that they're having more meetings. I don't know if it's because micromanaging managers who want to keep tabs on what employees are doing or are lonely. All they did was work. And so now they are scheduling several things for their employees so that they can have more connection. I mean, that's not conscious. They don't know that's why they're doing it. So some of us are doing even more at home than we did in other spaces. And I think we have to, the trick to managing that then becomes being realistic about where we are and what we're able to complete in a day. So I've changed what my notions, for example, of what I think a win is for the day. My original idea, I had this psychotic schedule of doing all of these things. I'm going to teach my daughter this. I'm just going to get all of these things done. And now I promise you, at the end of the day, I'm like, did she eat a vegetable today? And we exercised, and I wrote something down.
That's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds, but I mean, literally, it freed me to think about this more carefully, because again, we have to remember we are traumatized in this, and the rest of the world didn't stop. I think somewhere in my mind, I am outraged by the fact that shootings are still happening. It's a pandemic. You're still doing this. It's a
how
pandemic.
Do you have time?
Right. How do you have time, the energy, the desire to engage in those kinds of, in the middle of this pandemic? We're not all just focused on surviving this pandemic. No. The answer to that is no. So and other things in life are still happening whilst we are trying to fill, as Jimmy said, all of these different roles.
And that brings up a good point that one of our readers talked about, losing his sibling, a sister. And the fact that African Americans are a lot of the frontline workers. We are getting impacted in terms of our numbers disproportionately, which is always the case because of his historic systemic disenfranchisement and lack of access to care, and all of those reasons that people like to pretend don't exist. It's not because we don't care about ourselves, but historically we haven't had that, and we're still facing that here. And then also people have been marked by deaths. Mental health is very important. This is from the Archbishops, all because I couldn't read the rest of it. Okay, of us are challenged with how we had to change day-to-day activities and how we have to how it impacts our economy. Yes, correct. But in addition to that, and the impact on the economy, and the impact on your bottom line. People are actually hurting, like they're in mourning, they're bereaved because they have lost, their grandparents or their brother or sister, sibling, friends, people at work. And in addition to losing people from COVID, people are still dying, right? So that person who's been battling cancer for, 3 or 4 or 5 years or 10 years, or that person who has an aneurysm. A friend of mine had an aneurysm, and I mean, I just found it to be devastating. You're talking every day, and then that person's just gone. So can you speak to that a little bit too, in terms of how people should be dealing, first of all, what's happening in that particular space, but then also how people, maybe some strategies for dealing with those types of stressors?
I'll go first because it's personal to me too. I lost a grandmother during this COVID experience, and you can't go to a funeral, you can't properly, even commune with your family, right? You're seeing funerals on Zoom, and that's just not the same. And so I think that we are struggling with how I think we're learning how communal we really are is one thing. I think the other part is we're struggling with how do you to survive that, and how do you get that grief and get those feelings out in a healthy and in a safe way, besides what we typically do is bottle it up and it come out later in a different sort of format. I think that's important for us to just recognize it's happening. Dr. Bell, because you said you see more of this from your practice, you could talk about the strategies and what people are doing to sort of get around it.
Now, the tricky part is that what we normally do, we can't do. And so it's binded me in a lot of ways, because even another, whether people are experiencing, direct loss due to COVID-19 or some sort of other related loss, right? It is doubly impactful, because what I would tell them to do, get in the presence of family and friends, be nurtured by others in particular ways. All of the rites and rituals of passage, that we enact when someone passes away in the community, to not be able to engage in any of those. It just adds, I think, to the process of mourning. So I like to not use the term, I try to catch myself and not use the term social distancing, because we can make an active choice not to social distance. We are physically distant, but we are still socially and spiritually connected if we tap into the ways in which we can socially and spiritually connect with one another. Is it the same? No. Exactly the same. I've been to a number of Zoom birthday parties. They are not the same. That is not the same experience. Getting together collectively on Zoom to mourn the loss of someone is not the same. But I do think that we can tap into a level of connectedness that I think historically Africans have always kind of, embodied. We are going to have to. We're being pressed to connect with one another in ways outside of physical space. And I think that it's time, for us to kind of tap back into and explore what those methods are.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you said that too, because sometimes some people use funerals as opportunities to gather. This is from our producer, actually, and to celebrate, right? So it's not always mourning, but I think the thread that's drawing these two is the ability to connect, the ability to pull together. We are people of African descent, Africans. We are a collective cultural group, right? So that's kind of how we roll. Like that's so much a part of our DNA. So when you're unable to do that, I totally am co-signing on what both of you said. It just adds another layer in terms of something that you have to deal with. We also have and that was Nelson King Sr. who shared that he lost his sister to the virus 6 days ago. So we're sorry. We apologize. We apologize. We're sorry for your loss. There's also another question or comment from Mr. Mel Christopher Young, who is talking about, I'm assuming it's a Mr., but Mel Christopher Young, I could be wrong, who talks about making a choice and having to figure out when to technically go back to work when you are dealing with this kind of stressors. And then I think you can join that with something else that Nelson King Sr. said that he did in order to help get through this, and that was to Google scriptures and to remind himself of the word in order to help him move past some of the grieving and the process from losing his sister. Can you all speak to that?
Yeah, I think the thing that is important to what I heard about that is, I think it's a word that we all are going to get used to, is putting things into perspective.
Yeah.
Like you said, the world is still turning, right? The days are still going. Sometimes I don't know what day it is, but the days are still happening, right? And a lot of us are still blessed to wake up and be healthy and have things to do. So, getting those different modes, I have a daily scripture thing, app that comes up on my phone as well. And I look at it in the morning and meditate on it for a bit. And it's a way to sort of keep things in mind. But we have to think about that. And then the second part of that is, when you think about going back to work, again, it's your perspective about work. How important is it? We do have needs, the physical needs, the financial needs, but if you don't feel comfortable, what does that look like? Are you willing to have that conversation with your boss and boss's boss in some places to sort of say, hey, what are the precautions that we're making? What are we doing to do that? There are a lot of companies, as you see, who are making those concessions before you even have to have that conversation. No one's going back to Google in 2020. No one's going back to Twitter in 2020. Starbucks is thinking about how they're doing, their work. Coca-Cola is thinking about how they're going back, or if they're going back at all in 2020. So being comfortable with having that conversation about what your situation is, right? Because just because your workplace may open doesn't mean school is open.
Right.
And
right.
that's the thing we have,
Changes everything.
right? And so being able to have that transparent conversation is critical to what you need, because it's still stressors that we're going to have to deal with. If you have to go, if your job opens, but school is still closed, you still can't go to work. Therefore, you have to make an arrangement with your place of employment to figure out what's the best situation for you, right? If we were used to so many services that helped us, live this life, and some people are not open as fast as some of the revenue generating businesses will open faster. And so we have to think about what that looks like. Also, it's a really interesting thing that I think is important for us to think about is, do you want to go back to that job?
Right.
People are having real career conversations with themselves right now about what they really want to do, what really drives them, what really can be exciting for them. And so I think, get with someone, talk to people. There are thousands of people to talk to about these particular topics. I feel like I have these conversations every day, and I think they're fun to have. But are you really ready to go back? Number one, do you have the ability to go back? Number two, and then think about what does that look like for you in your life, because you still have to interact with other people. And it's easy for us to talk about things like sports and the like and how they're going to go back soon. That's all easy. What's hard is going to be the person who has to go back and is dependent on other services in order to live their life, right? If I have a 6-year-old daughter and school is still closed, I can't go back to work no matter what. I just can't.
Right.
And I have to figure that out. And so we have to be willing to have those conversations to see what is available to us so that we can make it work.
Right. Yeah. This is also like a place where we find a very clear everything about this, certainly I remember thinking going into this, we were about to get some real clarity about haves and have-nots in this country. So, even in myself, I always try to acknowledge it's hard to do, where I sit in privilege to make sure I'm sensitive in the work that I do, right? In my privileged space, I really realized I was not spending enough time with my daughter. I have been pressed to spend this time. We are just 24/7 on, me and 5-year-old just kind of having our time. I won't be going back to the exact same schedule. Right. However, which sounds so wonderful. And, Kanika Bell has just found this, she's growing and she's going to do less. Thank goodness COVID-19 has helped her celebrate her relationship with her child. I have a privilege in terms of being able to do that.
Yeah.
And so, I'm talking, I have a client who her son has to live with her child's father, which is not normally this situation and not necessarily always the best situation. But as a frontline healthcare worker working in the hospital in the way that she does, she never got a chance to not go, and she didn't want to endanger him. You know what I mean? He wasn't in school and she had to go to work. And then also she was worried about her own contamination and things like that. So she has not lived with her child for these months. And just months away from her own, child. And he is growing. And I'm thinking about what my child has experienced over these months and had I missed it, you know what I mean? And so that's a tricky place, because for those of us fortunate enough to be able to make the decision of, I will work less. I will cut expenses. I cut the cord, as people say on cable. I was like, I came up with hundreds of dollars. You know what I mean? That's still a privileged space, right, to move through, to say I can cut some expenses, I can do some things and do less so that I can prioritize what I like to prioritize. Now, I am saying that everyone can do that, but it's not going to be in that same way. Everyone can't decide to do less. Some people are going to have to figure it out. Children not in school, and I am still going to have to go to work. So what are we going to do? Are we going to go back to the kind of at-home, underground, daycare, big mama on the corner keeps all the kids? I mean, there's going to have to be some communal effort around how we as a people at all levels of SES kind of survive this and address this kind of going back to work issue, Yeah,
the other thing I think is important that you said about that is I think we have to admit to some of us that we sit in privilege, even with what's going on in the world, right? We have the ability to say, I'm not going to do this. and financially I'm still going to be fine. But the things I am going to do as well, we have to ignite some things too. You know, if you come out of COVID and you're 30 pounds heavier, that's a problem. And we have to talk about that too.
I'm judging.
We have to talk about that too, because being active, and think about it, the reason why COVID is hitting our community so much is because of some of the health disparities that we experience. It's because of some of the things that we're doing. And so we have to think about the entire self. It's not just the self. It's not just, you know, the family stuff. It is the spiritual places, right? You know, you have all these churches who are now online. Some people are going to consider not going to church anymore and stay online.
Right.
Right. Okay. Right. And then some people are going to figure that, you know, there's so many conversations we can have. We can talk about this all day. But I think we have to consider that those of us who have that ability have to think about what it looks like. And then the other part of the perspective piece is realize that there's somebody else who has nothing and is trying to figure this out too.
Yeah,
that's right.
Who is, you know, there are still homeless people on the streets.
Yeah.
And we have to be mindful of them too. And not just what we're going through. You're not going through this in isolation is what I'm saying. Right? Everyone's going through it. And how do you think about what that's going to look like?
Right. And that is very important in terms of this privilege piece, in terms of actually, I think COVID has helped people to realize what they're working with, right? What do your benefits do? For example, some of the insurance companies are allowing for free mental health care during this COVID piece. And so there is no copay, there's nothing. If you have the insurance, you can get it done. And so, you know, I think that people also need to think about, I think yesterday, Kanika, on our call, you talked about paid time off. People have that and aren't really thinking about using PTO.
When they've been using it. They should still use it. They've been working continuously over these months, you know.
Right. And you are caring for other people. You are caring for other family members and things of that nature. And so there's a whole set of criteria that you have. So you need to be talking to your HR. I also got a question from my mama. So, you know, I got to address it immediately because I don't want to get in trouble, because I still get in trouble at 47. I already got my phone call this morning. Girl, I already got my phone call this morning with what you're talking about today. Okay, so but I wanted to let you all know Bijan Johnson is like loving you, says that you all are two of the best professors at Clark Atlanta University, and is giving you comment after comment, love after love. But I just kind of want to pivot. And Mom, you're right on time. Thank you as always. Yes. Miss Beverly Burton, Esquire. She wants to talk about, and this is what the other thing is, you know, we're talking about these other things like church and work and childcare, but what about this exposure? And, you know, I'm a media scholar, so I really care about this issue a lot, to, you know, the continuous murder of unarmed Black people. We're having the uprisings that are happening in major cities all over. We're having the arrest of a Black Omar Jimenez, who I think is from this area. Certainly his mother is, who was arrested, the CNN reporter and his whole crew that was arrested for no reason, you know, freedom of press. We have a president who has declared war on, essentially, in my mind, this is how I'm interpreting it, but has declared war on Black people via his Twitter by saying that, you know, if you go out there, if you protest or what have you, something will happen to you, you will be shot or what have you. So two questions are, one, you have all of that coming into you, into your house. I call it a media diet, right? It coming to you through your screens, through your social media, through your TV. You've been exposed to that. Two, some people like the boomer generation, like my mom, have been dealing with kind of reliving that type of terror that they literally lived through Jim Crow segregation, and those, of course, who are even older than her. And then our generation and younger who have experienced it differently, you know, whether you talk about Rodney King or what have you, but we've had it where we're just inundated with these constant images and stories of terror and anger and violence and murder against Black people. What should we be doing about that? That's a long question. It's a big one, but let's just take a stab at it. Take a stab at it.
That is, it's a huge question. We should probably go back and forth and attack it in parts. Right? So yes. I think kind of the first part of the question is about kind of how we are coping with that, right? So we're all facing this global pandemic, this global trauma. We're all afraid together, and fear looks differently on different people. So you know, there's judgment about folks who were like, I don't care, I'm out here and I'm about to have a barbecue with 200 people. COVID won't stop me. And then there's some people who are like, I've closed all the windows in case COVID might come in through the screens. And I think both sides of those, debates kind of think the other people are crazy and dangerous. And so we're coping with that. And I think there's this other piece, like we are coping with that still in a country with just state-sanctioned executions of people based on skin color. Like the fact that is just still something with which we have to deal. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday, Dr. Burton, about the, I use your phrase as well about a diet and making sure that we are careful and intentional about what we are downloading, into our psyches. And I think it's important for us to be knowledgeable. So, this is going to sound kind of paradoxical. I believe that the information should be out because some people need to see that. Some people do see the video, quite frankly. I talk to, people who are not African-American, who've gone to graduate school with and whatnot. They needed to see these videos because they needed to know, where the source of that, where the anger comes from. And then what do you need to be doing as a person who sits in a place of privilege? They needed the shock of it. For the rest of us who have lived and even in our epic memory, we have what that looks like to just be murdered for existing. We have to be careful about our digestion of it. We have to be careful about how many times we're seeing it. I am very selective about that in general. I turn off notifications. I mean, because I have to be careful about that. I talk to people and their traumas all day. So my personal life, I have to, diet that very well. But I think for many of us, some of the anger is necessary to get some things done. I do want people to be, in a state of discontent. I do want people to feel like, okay, this is enough, but really mean this is enough. So what does that mean now? I don't want this to become another kind of just a season of hashtags and, and videos that we just said, that was really a shame. And then we kind of go back to the status quo. What will we do individually? What will be our piece? What will be the thing that we will do? What kind of activism will we personally engage in? And I think that thinking about that kind of activism actually helps with mental health. And I'm not shamelessly plugging, but in our book, we talk about, it's true. I mean, the research really shows that
where is that book? Okay.
Right, for especially for African-American women, but I think for many, many people engaging in activism around these issues that are, repeatedly traumatizing you, that actually can improve your mental health, that it actually can improve some of your emotions around it. It can actually address some of the PTSD around it. We see it in many different things. We see, who started Mothers Against Drunk Driving, mothers who had suffered, who had buried children, that there's a healing in becoming active in addressing a problem that is affecting you and your community.
Dr. Davis?
Yeah, I think to the first part of the question, I'm sorry, I want to talk about so many different things. The first part of the question, I think the reason why we're seeing it more is because of COVID, because we're not inundated with other pieces of media anymore right now, because there's nothing else to talk about, right? There's no sports on, so we have nothing. Right. There's no new television shows. So everything that is currently happening gets heightened attention. It doesn't mean that these things weren't happening before. It's that they were being buried amongst all the other things that were also happening. The other thing I think is also important to what you were saying, Dr. Bell, is just because you choose not to digest it doesn't make you ignorant.
Yeah.
Right? There are a lot of people who choose just not to look at this stuff because, like you said, we've had enough. We know these things are happening. It's not just happening in South Georgia. It's also happening in Florida. It's happening in Minnesota. It's happening in Chicago. It's happening in Detroit. It's happening. So what are we going to do about that is the real thing. And I think the attention that we're getting because there's nothing else to do is that bubbled up resentment. And because there's nothing, I can now put my attention to it because people need focus. They need something to focus on. This is good. This could be the wave of civil unrest and then civil rights from that standpoint, right? It could be the thing that we need. However, to assume, to act like this isn't happening all over the country would be obtuse as a thought pattern, right? We have to know it's happening. We just have to think that COVID is now exposing it a little bit more than what would happen in a normal time. We think about where we would be right now if we were just normal without a pandemic. It is the end of May. It just passed a holiday weekend. Most of our kids would have been out of school. We're thinking about summer plans. We're thinking about all these things that are socially inclined. The fact that what's happened the last week or two with these issues would not be as high on our list had we not had to focus on it. And now that we have to, we can now think about what are we going to do about it. But it also means, what are you going to do from a leadership standpoint? You know, one of the things I keep thinking about a lot, and I know we're not talking about voting, but we have to talk about it in a little bit. Is,
yes, we're going to talk about voting.
Talking about voting. That's exactly what we're talking about.
We think about the presidential election, but we're not thinking about all the other pieces of government that factor into that, right? Who is your prosecutor? Who is your sheriff? Who are your council people, right? Those are things that we really miss. The people who are really responsible for the accountability that you're asking for. We're asking for a police department to be accountable, but the chief of police in every major city is appointed by the mayor. Why are we not talking about what is the mayor doing? Why are we not talking about how you selected this person? Why are we not talking about that person's performance evaluations? What are they doing to keep their job? I know I'm a corporate guy, so I talk about all this stuff, right? But why are we not talking about those things that matter? Because that is how the change would happen, right? And you can fire the person when it happens, but who's been looking at the performance record for these people all the time? We talked, Dr. Bell and I have talked about this specifically on police officers. Police officers need to be evaluated all the time. Why? Because they go through trauma every single day.
Absolutely.
They need constant mental health evaluations. They need breaks from being a police officer to get back into understanding that it's not a us versus them mentality that my assumption is that they get used to. I'm not going to say I have the facts of that. That's just my thoughts. So I think we have to think about other things that factor into it. Part of it is who you're voting for. You know, there's 100 elections every year. We only pay attention to one that happens every 4 years.
That's right. That's right.
There's elections in your county and all these other places, and we got to think about that. I know we're running out of time, so.
No, it's fine. So, and that's a great point that you make, because in the killing of George Floyd, the police officer, who shall remain nameless until he's arrested and indicted, but the police officer had 10 prior complaints against him that had not been fully addressed. And if you had addressed that complaint, then maybe this could have been prevented, you know? And I say maybe because maybe it would matter if you address the complaint. It could be that kind of person who doesn't respond to that. So yeah, I think you all are raising some fantastic points about this and the things that you can do strategically to ease your mind. So it's not just breathing methods. It's not necessarily yoga, even though yoga is fantastic. All of these things are wonderful. But you can actually vote, right? You can actually spend this time looking at who your people are. You can work and volunteer with organizations that are already engaged in this kind of work. You know, this is what they do all of the time, all day. This is what the Archbishop was talking about. These organizations that are engaged in this type of work. That's one of the ways in which you can do it. You can figure out who these people are and tell your friends how to contact them. Even on the subject or off the subject of the police and on the subject of COVID awareness, and where I live in DeKalb County, they're doing free COVID testing. So I put that up on my social media networks yesterday to share with people so that they can get that, because I think some of the trauma of the COVID is that you can't see it. You don't know if you have it. You don't know who else has it. You don't know about these things. And so using your space and your social networks for that. The resurgence of overt racism may cause some to question even longstanding relationships.
Mother is on it.
Ben does not play.
On it.
Yeah. You know, this is a great question. This is a great question.
Personal. Okay, so the resurgence.
I think that's people have thought about that a lot, and I've had this conversation a lot.
Let me state the question for people who can't see it, because it's kind of long. Okay, so resurgence of overt racism may cause some to question even long-standing relationships, both personal and professional, with white people. Your thoughts on this? Hey, Mama, don't be taking my job. Go ahead. I mean, I'm not with that. I'm not coming to live with you because I need my money. Do not take my job. Okay, go ahead.
She's asking the good ones though. I tell myself off like what I hate is not white people. I hate white supremacy.
Yes, white supremacy.
And I think that if you are operating, just like I was saying before, I operate out of a place of privilege in some areas. I think you have to fight and be intentional about addressing those privileged areas. As a cisgender heterosexual woman, I can marry 15 dudes out here and no one would care. I recognize that as a place of privilege. You know what I mean? That is a place of privilege that my gender and my parts match. You know what I mean? I have to take that and think about that and how I'm applying that to how I move through the world. That is what I would be asking of white people. You know, not to actively think, if I do not actively address my privilege, and God forbid I use it as a weapon, as we saw in the past week, if I don't address that issue, I am participating in white supremacy.
Yes. I think white supremacy requires consent, and that's what people forget, right? It's invisible, and it is embedded in so many of our structures and institutions, even the ways in which we can interact with one another, that people forget that. But yeah, white supremacy is the real evil. Yes, I'm sorry, Dr. Davis, go ahead.
It's fine. I think that the core question that comes to my mind about your mom's question is, are you clear with your white counterparts of where you stand? Is the first part. Because a lot of us put masks on our interactions with our white friends, both professionally and personally, that we don't talk about that, right? We kind of avoid the racial conversation. We don't talk about how we are unapologetically Black, or how we are, that these things bother us as we come to work, because that's just something that is a stitch. We don't want them to feel uncomfortable. Therefore, we give them permission to not have that discussion, right? And I think we have to first be willing to have that conversation, right? Do your white counterparts know where you stand on these issues? Do they know that stuff like this is bothering you when you come to work, when you have a conversation, when you're on that Zoom call, that you just saw this thing happen last night, and so you're not as happy or as joyful or as jovial as you normally are? I think it's the first part. The second part is, because the part that your mom's question is really hitting on is it causing you to think about those relationships? I think you're always thinking about relationships unfortunately with your white counterparts, about where you stand with them and how they match. Some for us are a little different based on where you grew up and how you grew up. Might be a little different for us, but I think we're always thinking about the interactions that we have with people of just other cultures. Now, those of us who are mostly African cultures, I think it's easier. But when we have those differences, I think we're thinking about, do they really understand me? Do they get what I'm trying to say? Or am I just the Black friend that they're going to ask these questions to, which a lot of us have been in our lives. So I think, yes, the answer to your mom's question is yes, it does cause me to think about those relationships, but it also causes me to make sure that I'm clear about who I am in those relationships as well, and how I come off and what is important to me.
And it's okay, to say no. No is a complete sentence. We talked about that yesterday, Kanika. It is okay to unfriend someone, especially someone that you may have around you, and they might be a work friend, or and I say work friend, or someone that is kind of around you. It's okay. You don't have to be abused. You don't have to. And I'm seeing Daniel Black comment. Hey, Daniel. You don't have to. He says, go CAU. But you don't have to.
Our personal mentor, Dr. Daniel Black.
Yes, Dr. Daniel Black is, he's a legend. I'm sure people who are watching this know him. If you don't, check him out, Dr. Daniel Black. Yeah, but you can unfriend people. And some people don't like to do that because they want to hurt. What's beautiful about social media, this is why ghosting just prevails in dating. It's horrible, but it happens. You can just I won't cut because my mom is like, but you can just cut a person off. Like, you can just say, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I had a post up about something related to this, and somebody came on, and I'm talking about anybody, not just the white people. Trying to defend the white supremacists who I was trying to highlight. And I was like, oh, that's emphatic. You are cut. We're never doing business together. I'm not speaking to you in the street. I'm not shaking your hand. You're not my kind of people. But you don't have to subject yourself to the constant barrage of ignorance, negative comments, uninformed people, who are actually people who like to dominate the conversations in social media. You don't have to subject yourself to that, so you can say goodbye. And social media lets you do it. And if you want to be passive aggressive about it, as you can tell from me and my family, we aggressive, right?
Yeah.
But if you want to be passive aggressive,
you should be
you can use
aggressive.
you can use COVID.
I would say, like, I always tell people,
Mhm.
one of the monikers I live by is make sure everyone who's in your boat is rowing in the same direction and not drilling.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
People in your team, that's not about that, and that's okay to tell that some people's relationship with you has reached this end. That's okay, right? Because everyone's not going to meet your destination. It's not meant for them all to be there. But you have to be willing to and have the integrity and character to say, I don't stand with that. Not just the ghosting is a passive aggressive way of doing it, but I prefer the direct way. Hey, you know what? I just don't rock with you on that anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Anymore.
Mm-hmm. Right, absolutely. And I think that we had someone say white people. Oh, let's see. We have a question from Janice. Can you put that back up?
Okay.
Norman's our super producer. How do you get a longtime friend and diehard 45? Janice, that ain't your friend. Okay, supporter to understand how detrimental the things he is doing is when they are not open to accepting other perspectives. They gotta go, Janice. I'm not a psychologist, but they gotta go. Okay, I'm quiet.
Well, I would say that the funny thing about the question is, how are they a longtime friend, 45 supporter, and what are you guys agreeing on then? What are the things that are the commonalities that make them your friend? And I'm not about 45 or not. It's just about are the values that you have the same with that person? Because if they can't see your perspective or not open to seeing your perspective, then what's the point of the friendship? Why is it really a friendship, or is it just an acquaintance?
Sometimes and I think that in all races, people are often one or two issue voters. And that can be just problematic, right? So there are people who are thinking about some particular things and they vote with a particular party because of these one or two issues. And I think the conversation, trying to convince someone to change is going to be an exercise, I think, in frustration for you, Jen, unfortunately. If you're the question more so is how can I coexist then with this person? Because trying to get them to shift is going to just, it's going to be difficult, because whatever that one or two issue, to ignore some of these other things means those one or two issues are prioritized. They're primary to that person. So back to Jimmy's point, it would be kind of, can we coexist in these spaces as these kinds of friends? Based on the things on which we do agree, because I think I'm not sure we're changing minds out here. I do it too. I spend entirely too much time in these online battles with people who are, often ill-equipped for the argument, not because they disagree with me, because they don't read the law. So they're, I'm arguing with somebody who just kind of says stuff, and I'm just literally saying, actually, statistically, that's not true. Actually, that's not a fact. And then I love it when they say something like, well, I mean, what are you? You're not like a psychologist or something. Well, you know what I'm saying? And so I realized that was affecting me personally. I was spending too much time kind of like, I'm trying to convince someone who's like out here on their one issue that they may or may not even be accurate, about. And when it comes to your personal friends, you also have to reserve your peace. You know what I'm saying? Like reserve your space on that, and kind of, we might be friends and say what's up, like,
right.
If we're anywhere closer and these issues come arise, I will be drained.
Yeah, Michael Watson, the Archbishop, says we all need to have friends or people in our circle who are like-minded and think like we think. Jeremiah Allen, one of my former students, one of my JCSU Golden Bulls, go Jeremiah, has a question about his statement, after seeing years of Trump's vile behavior and how it's persisted, can you speak on changing things with the obstacle of the Electoral College? Is it likely we can get him removed? So that's really a question, Jeremiah, that's more for political scientists, more for lawyers, because that's how that would take care of it. But things that you can do that will ease your mind is to do everything you can in your power, whether it's voting, whether it's proposing legislation to your people. A lot of legislation actually comes from people who have been, and that's what Kanika was talking about when she talked about the mad folks, right? These are people who have been impacted in certain ways. We have been impacted by this president. We have been impacted by these rogue police officers who are shooting and killing unarmed people. You know, whether we talk about Breonna Taylor, whether we talk about George Floyd, when we're talking about these vigilantes and Trayvon Martin and Ahmaud Arbery here in Georgia. And, you know, we can just keep going. Like, you can just list names literally one after the other after the other. You can do things. You can lean on your council person. You can lean, and I mean lean, meaning use your influence and the people around you influence. Jeremiah, you're an excellent writer. You're the perfect person to write letters or write on behalf of your neighborhood or your community or your group of friends or what have you, and letting people know who are your representatives, local, state, and federal, local, state, and national representatives about how you feel about issues and what you expect to see if they expect to receive your vote. So there are things that you can do to help move the needle, but ultimately, you do need those folks who are experts in that field to make that type of change.
Lisa Abrams has a page, and I don't remember it off the top of my head. Remember, Nsenga, we were both there at that event with her.
Fairfight, Georgia.
Yeah, she has a couple of pages and organizations that just kind of detail how this all works. I mean, you know, she just has that kind of the legal brain. And so she kind of details how things work. And then also about just kind of, you know, the history of voting rights. And she addresses some things about the Electoral College and what we need to be thinking about in upcoming elections. So
I think your point, though, and thing is more salient, is that you got to start, the local level is the biggest thing, right? Do you even know where your police precinct is? Do you even know who are the cops that work there? Do you know, we go, I grew up in New York City where you knew where the police precinct was. They knew who the good kids were. They knew who the kids who got a little bit of trouble. You knew who the cops knew you, right? Just using the police as one aspect of it, right? We don't do that anymore. We don't know who the police officers are, and therefore they don't know us either. And so that there's some things that we could be doing at the local level that can help us, try to start to alleviate these issues. They're not going to be alleviated tomorrow, but there's so many things we could be doing actively that can help to know that this is a serious issue and that there's something that we need to be thinking about to do these things. There's things we can do. We can be voting. We can show up. We can make sure they know who the faces are, know where people live, and make sure that you get, there's some legislations in some cities where police officers have to live in a district that they police.
Yeah.
Right? That they're local and they know the people there. That way they're more, there's less in there's studies that show there's less actual crime and violence in those areas because the cops know who the people are. So the thing happening in some of these places doesn't solve for everything. Well, it won't happen as much. So I think there's some things that we have to be actively doing that could help to alleviate some of these issues. But the trauma is the trauma is the trauma. And so we have to make sure that we're still dealing with it and getting through it.
Okay, we're coming towards the end. Do you all have a few extra minutes? I know y'all charge for your hours and stuff, but do y'all have a few extra minutes?
We love talking about this stuff.
Sorry, that you can donate to the people of NNPA, the audience. Okay, good. We're gonna keep moving then. Keep going. All right, Dr. Mark Cunningham, who's our guest earlier in the week, says, I find that all the self-righteousness on social media in the midst of everything that is going on causes me tremendous mental strain and frustration. Do you have strategies for dealing with that? Or even, sometimes people who leave their televisions on all day on CNN, or leave their televisions on all day on Fox, God forbid, or leave their televisions on whatever channel all day, and they're just getting inundated with this information. But let's talk about the self-righteousness. Like where does that come from, and what can you do? Because people do like social media. Like, it's social. It's kind of one of the ways in which you can actually get out of be in touch with people and not have to leave your home or not have to leave your car or what have you. Can we talk about that point? Like, how do you manage that stress?
Too, that it's the news source for people now. Like, my mother gets the paper delivered. I mean, so she is still opening up the newspaper. Like, she's still old school in how she puts together her information. She watches the news at night. She watches different outlets and compares. That she is unusual. And the majority of folks are saying, my students would be like, I heard this is happening. And I'm always like, what? That's not happening. Most of us are 2 clicks away, actually, from even recognizing that what we've seen is garbage, is not even, is coming from some, and I think sometimes that self-righteousness that he was talking about comes from, like, we read the headlines and then we post. So I think kind of the first thing I would tell people to do, please do not read and just post kind of everything that you see and hear. Psychologists have this idea about, like, that you're in different zones when you're facing a crisis or a trauma. You're in the fear zone, the growth zone, and then kind of like this acceptance and, and so in the fear zone of COVID-19, or even about all of these killings, you kind of just post everything. You know what I mean? You respond to everything online and you post everything, and you're kind of just not as responsibly engaged, right? And so that would be kind of my first press for people, to be responsible in terms of their engagement on social media. Pick your battles kind of wisely and think about, what you're going to engage in and whether or not you can handle that. Do you know what I mean? These attacks get personal. People will go through your profile and put pictures of you. I mean, it just, because people turn into cyberbullies. Everybody's a tough guy, behind the camera. And so we have to pick and choose. Do we want to get into a fight about this, or are we trying to educate or represent a point, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think what I'm seeing that's frustrating me most is the self-righteousness, but also, you didn't even click this article. This, right. What I mean? Black folks were posting an article about hospitals being paid to give people COVID or something like that. That publication also, not that long ago, put out a piece about Black people being genetically inferior. It's a radical right, publication, but because it fit that narrative, you didn't even click it. It was a 4-sentence, poorly written paragraph. It wasn't even an article. And I'm just like, take this down. You know what I mean? Like, click it and read it to send it. So I'm not hating on social media, because it we just have to own that that's the way that people are getting information now. But we can be active and more responsible participants, I think, in what's out there.
Yes. Annette Phillips has been commenting a lot. Thank you so much. She says, she goes to the community police meeting once a month. They have a neighborhood community officer. And so that's to respond to what Jimmy had said, or Dr. Davis had said earlier. We work with the Bronx District Office to help train the attorneys for their first felony court cases. I know my mother represented the police department for 30 years of her legal career. Wow. And there is all types of training that does happen, at procedures. That's why they're able to say they didn't follow procedure. That was never supposed to happen, right? Mm-hmm. People can make those statements because they have that type of information. Ethel Monique Johnson, relative to what you just said, Kanika, says, what advice do you have for protecting our children's mental health from the visual images of violence against people who look like them, and for discussing these consistently occurring situations, the hijacked electoral process, leadership reflecting qualities we warn them against, police brutality, etc., with the ones old enough to be aware / interested? Great question, Ethel. What are some of the strategies?
That is a huge question.
Or tools.
I'll be honest. My daughter is only 5, but I do have these conversations with her. I just think it's important for her, in a way that she can understand. Right. My daughter knows what racism is. She knows that some things are unfair. She knows, she has kind of some basic understandings of things, because she's an only child. She spends a lot of time in adult conversation. It's just an only children thing. That happened to me too. And so she's not sent away as a lot of children are, because they have other children to talk to. She can overhear this. So she does need to digest it in some form or another. I am, though, however, careful about allowing her to see too many of the images, because she won't, kind of put it together that even it happened one time. That happened during 9/11, that children were thinking that the attacks were happening over and over again. They didn't understand that it was footage and it was being replayed. So
right.
Literally, how a child's mind thinks. But I do think the scary reality is that we do have to prepare our children and talk to them about some very real things. There are a couple of books, actually, and I can't remember them, but about like how to talk to children about racism, how to talk to children about death, and that's just a way to kind of broach these topics. But when you have older children, I think it is important to talk about things like hijacked electoral processes and whatnot. I mean, you voted 18, and so I think teenagers should definitely start to have these conversations. And we, just like any trauma that we think our children might come across, you just constantly check in with them. How are you thinking about this? How do you feel about what's happening? Are you sad? Let me know about your feelings. There's ways in which I think that we can kind of keep the line of communication open, but also watching how we appear in front of them, because I think they respond the way they see us respond. Mm-hmm. So, certainly when I'm looking at the computer and I go, oh my gosh, and I'm exclaiming and I'm upset and tears in my eyes, my daughter is very connected to that. What's happening? And I don't say nothing. I do have a measured response for, something really unfair happened to somebody because he was brown. And so yeah. Connect with it, but not where I'm trying to traumatize, and make her fearful of having, multicultural friends.
Right. And as the media scholar, let me hop in here real quick and just say, parents should be watching television with their kids, watching videos with their kids. I know some people like to play video games, which is fun. I like video games. But you should be actually watching what they're watching so that you can have these conversations with them in real time. We have young kids like Kanika and me. My daughter's 4. You actually have to watch because sometimes things creep in. Sometimes you think you're on a children's channel, especially if you're watching online. And there'll be some crazy ad even for something that's just completely inappropriate for a person of that age. And so I would encourage you to actually watch media with your child so you can have these conversations. I would discourage you from showing them violent images against themselves in the same way that they get scared of scary movies sometimes. And then you got to deal with them being scared for like 10 years. Like they go into college and they got to figure out how to tell their friends they sleep with the light on, their roommates that they sleep with the light on because some movie they saw when they were 5 years old. Those images are really burned into your memory, especially visual images. The data, it stays forever. And so you want to be mindful of actually showing them the memes of Mr. Floyd juxtaposed with Mr. Kaepernick or things of that. You want to be mindful and make sure that they're not seeing those kinds of violent images because it can actually scar them. But I mean, totally agree. I think most media scholars agree. You just have to find the language that is appropriate for your child and the words that is appropriate for your child, even your teenagers or what have you. And you have to have these conversations. I mean, as Black parents, we just have to do it because unfortunately our kids don't get to be kids and free. Like we don't have that kind of, that's a privilege we don't have. So you can't let them just go out in the world, in the United States anyway, but you can't let them just go out in the world and think because mommy and daddy or mommy and mommy have a good job and that they live in this nice neighborhood or not, that they're just going to be okay. That's just not the world we live in. It hasn't been the world that we live in. And I think also tying it to historical events or kind of like putting it in a historical lens also helps them understand that this is not something that's just happening today. It's been happening and we've been trying to solve it for a long time. Dr. Davis, did you have anything to add about that?
No, I don't. I think what was said was perfect.
Okay, so we're going to be, I think we're going to be wrapping up. I'm trying to make sure we got all our questions. If there are any last questions, let us know now. Strategies. How do we deal with anxiety, the sense of hopelessness? And lots of issues are causing this. And I know this is a broad question for psychologists because you're like, I need to meet with you individually so I can talk about your situation and figure out what's going on. Right. I know that y'all like, can you right? You work in this space. You over here. I got it. I see it all in your face. All right. But can we just have some strategies, methods, tools that people can use to help deal with the anxiety from being in the house, facing this fear of this invisible killer that we're all trying to survive, and then really having to deal with the hopelessness that we obviously feel when we see all these numbers of deaths, whether it's from COVID or whether it's from police brutality or whether it's from domestic violence. Can you help us in that way so we can leave our readers with something that they can do? viewer.
Things, of course, everything doesn't work for everybody. But I do think that in this season, we should be getting outside a little bit. It's not in the, in the particles in the air. You can be outside. It's about, your proximity to other people in terms of avoiding it. So just a simple walk around the block. My daughter and I are sure we make sure we get actually a couple of miles of walking in. It's bonding time. We're talking with each other. We're not in danger. And we're just getting a chance to change our scenery to some extent. For me, I declutter something every day, even if it's something very small. It helps me feel like I am releasing. I have a lot to declutter. Neater people may not be able to use that strategy, but I mean, even if it's just like a purse that's filled with stuff, I've been just doing that, kind of just unloading some things. It symbolically is allowing me to release. I also think it's important. We talked about this on the program yesterday about what we wake up to, and then what are our final thoughts at the end of the day. So, certainly we're going to have work, we're going to have frustrating things, we're going to have our intake, whether it's on news outlets, social media, discussions with friends. Try to keep that in the middle part of the day. Try not to wake up to kind of the stressful images and thoughts, and try not to go to bed with them. Try not to be in your bedroom when you are looking through Facebook and seeing kind of what people are responding to. Try to keep that in the middle part of the day, so it's not part of your good morning, and it's not, kind of staying with you at night. And I also think it's a good idea for people who are really experiencing anxiety to try to purge a little bit of that, before the wind down routine. Write out the things that are bothering you, and then write out some things you're really grateful for, and sometimes we do kind of dramatic things like ball up the things that are bothering you, bury it, throw it away, set it on fire, things like that. You don't necessarily have to do that, but I think it is important to wake up the next day with a list of things that you're grateful for, rather than an intense, possibly unrealistic to-do list. Of that kind of high productivity. I think we've been putting a lot of pressure on ourselves for. So I've got a ton of ideas, but I could go on forever. Bring out some things that work for me. I personally make sure that I laugh myself to tears every single day of my life. It is a spiritual ritual for me. I believe laughter literally cures my body and, my mental health. So, I legitimately, if it gets late and I'm like, oh, it's getting nighttime, I will look for something that will make me laugh that hard. So that kind of my final thing that I do is just, I am, touching base with the thing that heals me. And I think people might have to find that thing for themselves, if it's music, whatever it is, so that they start and end their day with a sense of peace, a sense of connectedness.
Yes. Dr. Davis?
I know. I think you said a lot of good ones, Dr. Bell. I think the things that I would add to that, I think I will echo getting outside. I think you walk around. I will tell you, I have lived in East Atlanta for a lot of years. I've met my neighbors in a new way by walking around who's in your neighborhood. And not socially distancing, just seeing people and walking around. Do your own thing. Put your headphones in. You can just zone out, but it gives you a time to get outside. That fresh air is such a good thing. I think the other thing I would add to that is what I do, and I think, and I've gotten a lot of my coaching clients to do, and that whole attitude of gratefulness is that perspective piece. And one exercise I would tell people to do is send one text a day to someone and tell them how much you appreciate them for something they've done or who they are. Just one. It takes 7 seconds to do, but you'll see how it releases energy and brings energy back to you, right? So there's a lot of other, I could give you 1,000 different things to do, but I think a gratefulness exercise would be really good. So what I try to do is, and actually it's kind of funny since we're at the end of the month, here's what I would do. So Monday is the 1st. Make a list between now and Monday of 30 people you want to thank. And once a day, send them a text and tell them what you're thankful for. That could be your spouse, it could be your parent, it could be a coworker, anything that you appreciate about them, because gratefulness is a mental model that allows you to release stress, because it allows you to realize and put things in perspective that would be really good for you. The other thing that I think would be really good for people to do is to really to do things like, you know, meditate and things like that. You have Calm and a lot of apps that allow you to learn how to meditate really quickly. They play the music. Of course, it may put you to sleep. You know, work through that. But it's ways to get your energy back. You know, people are reading. People are doing a lot of things that they want to spend their time on. I spend my time between reading, meditating, sitting outside, just paying attention to things I haven't done in a long time. And that's very calming as well, especially for those of us who are still working. Realize that you have to turn work off at some point, and do something for yourself, or it doesn't work. You can't pour from an empty cup, right? And so you have to think about, how do you fill yourself back, whatever that is. I think Dr. Bell, yours is great with laughter. It could be talking to a friend. I'm on a Zoom call with two of my best friends once a week just to talk and laugh. And we're just talking about college days, nothing serious. And our rule is we can't talk about anything serious. We're cracking jokes, and it's just fun. It can be very fulfilling. So many things you could do. I mean, I would love to be helpful in as many more in any way I can, but there's just so many ways to get your energy back. But realize that you have to get it back. That you just keep expending, or the traumas that we're seeing will just exacerbate themselves.
Yes. Well, thank you. That is wonderful. I just wanted to remind people, well, first of all, let me say thank you to Dr. Davis and Dr. Bell. You all have been amazing. They are professors of psychology at Clark Atlanta University. They are in private practice as well. They are alums of Morehouse College and Spelman College. So we're happy about that, because, you know, we have our series on HBCUs that we're doing. Hopefully we'll have one of your college presidents on next week. But in the meantime, just to remember, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. You can, you know, just kind of set a calendar. You know, you should be working on your mental health all the time, but there are lots of resources that are available to you. I'm going to do my little shameless plug. This is the book that people keep asking about. It's a book. So people sometimes, people sometimes ask, they're like, Nsenga, Dr. Burton, why are you on mental health? That's not your area of expertise. Well, actually, I wrote a book about it.
Actually got a whole book.
Right. It is. And Dr. Kanika Bell is one of my co-authors, Dr. Stephanie Evans, who actually has a book coming out on Black women in yoga, which talks about all the great people, all the great sisters like Rosa Parks and Angela Cooper, who practiced yoga in order to survive the trauma and stress of being part of the civil rights movement. So make sure, you know, you don't have to buy this book. I mean, you can, I'm just saying, but you don't have to. There's so many options. No More Martyrs is out there. There are so many groups on Twitter. They're just doing fantastic work. Shanika Walker Barnes. I mean, I can keep going. So just find your person. If you can't, you know, you don't have insurance, think about the ways in which you can use social media if you have access to it. Think about what you can do for you. In the meantime, check with your insurance companies. You can. Many of them, I said it at the top, I'm going to say it at the bottom. You can get your help for your psychological issues or challenges, or just if you just need somebody to talk to for free. During the course of this pandemic, at first, it was a fixed amount of times. They just extended it. So you can do that. I had my session yesterday. That's why I can be here today. Even though I'm not sleeping because of all this stuff that's happening in the world. And that's just real talk. It just is what it is. So, you know, it's important to take care of your mental health. We are Black people. We are survivors. We have survived this before. We will survive this again. But we want to do this with our mental intact. Yes. All right. So have a fantastic weekend. Take care of you. Practice self-care. And as I always end, stay clean, wash your hands, and stay home. Thank you.
Please.